Thank you and welcome everyone. So after the steam engine, electricity and the internet, the next big thing that Gartner sees will have a similar impact on mankind is generative AI. The hype will subside as the reality of implementation sets in, but the impact of generative AI will grow as people and enterprises discover more innovative applications for the technology in daily work and life. So I would again like to welcome everyone listening in, as well as the panel here today with me. This panel discussion is organized by the official ISC2 chapters of Colombo and Hyderabad. I am Anurag Tiwari, the moderator for this discussion today. With the disruptive power that is predicted out of Gen AI, we would want to break it up into some of the fundamental questions that you and I would have as we grapple to keep up with this fast evolving thread that hits the mainstream headlines in late 2022. We have with us an esteemed and diverse panel, which will help us break this topic and bring to the table unique perspectives as they approach Gen AI from their respective realms. I would do a quick round of introduction with the panel that we have here. I'll start with Krishnavini. She is a seasoned leader with over 20 years of experience across all phases of software development lifecycle and beyond. She currently heads the Microsoft Security Solutioning for AI.Cloud unit in TCS for customers across the major geographies. She's a postgraduate in technology, has led teams in automation, product engineering, and research and evangelization of emerging technologies, to name a few. And her interests include understanding the intersection of evolving technologies with legacy technology transformation journeys and understanding the human elements of computing and security. The next we have here is Harish. Harish is a cybersecurity director and thought leader with wide experience in security strategy, security architecture, security operations, cloud and infrastructure security, DevSecOps, security compliance, and so on. Also, he has worked a lot on innovative technologies, security things, including those that are posed by Gen AI, blockchain, data analytics, and RPA. Harish has led strategic cybersecurity transformation and implementation projects and has managed large teams for multiple clients and industries as well. Last but not the least, we also have Rajdeep Sharma. He's an information security and risk executive with 16 plus years of experience in successfully leading complex strategy, governance, and operational engagements for global financial service organizations and big five consulting firms across Canada, US, and India. Rajdeep has demonstrated expertise in leading various aspects of cybersecurity program through proficient handling of diverse roles across the first and second lines of defense. So in a nutshell, I'm glad that we have this diverse panel because we have one who is a security architect. We have somebody from the technology who is looking at Gen AI and trying to see how it's disruptive. And then we have the risk and compliance person who is sweating with looking at all the different things that are happening around him and how to make sure that we are still meeting business objectives while being secure and compliant. So without further delay, I think I'll just dive straight into the discussion and I'll open up the question first with Harish. And I would really want to have Harish thoughts on, Harish, what really changed in the recent times in the space of generative AI that it is such a buzzword now. Gen AI, I believe, was introduced almost back in 1960s in chatbot. We've been reading and studying AI as part of my graduation, post-graduation, almost decades and 2 decades ago. So what really changed that everybody is now talking about Gen AI? If you could break it up for us, I think that would be really helpful.
Sure. Thank you, Anurag, and thanks for the introduction. And it's great to be here with Krishnavini and Rajdeep as well. So I'm looking forward to a very informative and fruitful discussion. Coming back to your question, why is it such a buzzword? Now, you're right in that generative AI as a field of machine learning is not new. It's been around for a while. Before we delve into the cause for the buzz, since you started with me, I will attempt to provide an overview of the technology behind generative AI. I know we've all had some type of introduction to this technology, AI in general, and then neural networks and a lot of that during our education. But from a technology standpoint, like the name suggests, Gen AI, it's a class of AI algorithms that can generate content such as text, music, videos, and even code, and now even voice. So within the generative AI space, there are certain machine learning models called large language models, which are trained on massive amounts of data, text, which enables them to interact with humans in a natural language, basically mimicking a human. So these LLMs are based on an architecture called the transformer architecture. Now, this is new because this wasn't covered in our academics. So this was introduced in a white paper published in the year 2017. So I think the white paper was titled "Attention is All You Need." You can Google it, and it's an interesting read if you have background in that area. Now, this architecture, in my opinion, was a breakthrough as it alleviated certain key limitations with traditional neural networks that powers most of these AI algorithms, right? Especially the traditional neural network architectures for NLP, natural language processing. So, for instance, it was easier to achieve parallelization with transformers compared to, say, a recurrent neural network or a convoluted neural network, a CNN. Of course, we could do parallelization with CNNs as well, but their architecture had limitations with processing sequences of variable lengths. Now, the another challenge was with limited context. So both RNN and CNN, they had limited context for each element. They could process input sequence one element at a time, whereas transformers had larger context capabilities. So it is this transformer architecture that is powering most of the large language models we are seeing today. In fact, the GPT in ChatGPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Now, coming back to the question, right? Why is it such a buzzword? So the technology has been around for a while. Yes, there has been improvements in that technology over the years, as early or as late as you would call it, maybe 2017, 2018. But why is it such a buzzword now, especially if the technology has been around for a while? I think it has become a buzzword after the launch of ChatGPT by OpenAI. It was then that regular people started realizing the potential of Gen AI and its ability to have human-like conversations. Of course, we had chatbots in the past. Those were conversational Q&A based, but there were limitations. And also, I had worked on chatbots where I had to feed the FAQs beforehand, kind of predict what the user might ask, also pre-bake the answer. So there were limitations with the earlier chatbots, although there were improvements. But Gen AI has taken this leaps and bounds forward. So its ability to have human-like conversations while providing meaningful responses. Well, most of the time meaningful, I would say, if not all the time, right? That kind of piqued people's interest. Also, ChatGPT's ability to maintain context, right, which allowed humans to interact with it like a regular human, I think brought this technology into further limelight. So I think those were two reasons for the buzz. And also when ChatGPT launched with GPT-3 model, now there are different models that power, there are different versions of these models that power various chatbots. There are GPT-3 models such as Ada, Babbage, Curie, which were trained on data of various sizes. But the GPT-3 model that ChatGPT launched a few years ago was trained with about 175 billion parameters and had a token size of about 2,000 tokens, approximately, I think 2049, if I'm not mistaken. And it was trained on data until October 2019. So for when it launched, obviously there was a lot of interest on it, on how the product was performing. And today the GPT-3 models are actually considered legacy. The model with which ChatGPT had initially launched, it's considered legacy, and there are now GPT 3.5 and even GPT-4 models, which are better at reasoning even, which support also much higher token sizes, ranging from about 4,000, 8,000 to even 16,000 and 32,000 tokens. And this is for context. So these models and the token sizes help with maintaining context. So these models are getting better by the day, and the buzz, I think, is only going to go higher, at least for the next couple of years. And the last reason for the buzz is also the entry of many players, right? Large, medium, and small, including many startups in the space offering innovative services. So generative AI is now a product category, right? Previously, we probably had uh, products that were AI enabled, that had machine learning models in the backend, but generative AI is now a category in itself. It has carved a niche for itself. So the kind of products being offered are, in my opinion, disruptive, such as the co-pilots, which claim to immensely improve human productivity. I've been toying with a few of them, and there's clearly my personal opinion, there's clearly a marked improvement in my productivity as I started using these co-pilots. I'm also evaluating a few of these. So these are changing and impacting many domains, such as email and document generation, summarization, search, video, graphic designing, music creation, and so on. I think these are some of the key reasons for the buzz, in my opinion.
Got it. Well, thanks, Harish. So I think what I also see is Chat GPT has almost become like the synonym for Gen AI, although that's just one of the most popular avatars of Gen AI that you and I or any common man can actually use in their day-to-day work. While there are so many scenarios and use cases that are still yet to be exploded, um, from an enterprise standpoint and maybe even from a nation standpoint, which time will tell. But I think it's helpful to know that whenever we talk about Gen AI, it's very easy to kind of talk about ChatGPT because it's so popular, it's so common, it's so everybody of us probably have used it by now, and played with it. And so I think that's helpful. I'll come back to more on that as we progress on this discussion. I would want to take this conversation further and also maybe go to Krishnavani next and talk about from her perspective, the role that you play and the intersection of technologies that you are in. What makes you so excited about Gen AI from your perspective? What are those specific use cases that you are really excited about? Where do you, I mean, from your vantage point, how do you see things of these different technologies merging, which includes Gen AI as well?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Anurag. As I was listening to Harish, it was very helpful in going through the entire journey of where it has all started few decades back and then where we are now, and why this buzz and all about. So the two keywords that I made a note of, or that caught my attention very much were, he said, meaningful conversations with context, right? So that is where the current wave of interest around this Gen AI technologies, it's all centered around that. How well are we contextualizing and how meaningful is the conversation going to be with, right? If not, if we look at it just as a generative one, as something which, let's say, as he rightly said, there were chatbots from very long before. In fact, I would say 10 years before, when there was a technology that can take your FAQs and then build a chatbot kind of a thing where you select a question and answer comes up, we were excited. Now today, when I start building content by giving a few keywords and then letting chat gpt or bard know what am I looking for specifically, what kind of audience I'm looking for, the kind of essay or the kind of output that comes for, it's way beyond what we had seen in the previous avatars, right? So again, if I mix that with where I am coming from, right, I've been advocating for security, as in cyber security, mostly on cloud parts, again the hybrid technologies part, and then how this mixture comes up, and then there are already complications of what is on premise, what is on cloud, and then what gets transmitted from within your uh, premise to out of your cloud, and then amidst this complications, throw in AI, particularly throw in your Gen AI, right? So how do I, knowing that, and coming from a security background, I mean, all of us are supposed to be doubting Thomases, right? All of us are trained and ingrained in ourselves that you question everything, follow a zero trust approach, never trust anything. Now from there, our journey towards leveraging or harnessing this Gen AI as a right tool, to improve the productivity. When Harish was also mentioning about improving human productivity, so that is where my particular interest areas of how do I define more and more use cases around cybersecurity. So primarily, I would say, if I have to categorize them, bucket them. The first one would be on how do I enhance my defensive AI techniques. It could be vulnerability detections and auto remediation suggestions, which is coming beautifully in a lot of the tools that are already there in the market, right? In one form or the other. If you have to stretch it to an extent, then our BAS, breach and attack simulations, wherein you need a lot of computational power and thinking of multiple scenarios wherein you can break the system down. So in all these places where you need a lot of human capacity that can get replaced by rather computational capacity, I can go ahead with a use case around Gen AI. And then if I have to combine our advanced LLMs, let's say such as OpenAI's GPT-4, if I combine that with a specific security model, it can contextualize and then augment the capabilities of an existing security analyst, right? You can think of something like an adaptive risk scoring, and then if I go a little further, how about an interactive threat intelligence, right? So this model I talked about, a large LLM, let's say OpenAI, and then you put a security specific model on top of that, then start consuming the trillions of daily signals that come in. It could be anything, a threat intelligence that comes in, right? If you take, for example, Microsoft Defender threat intelligence, there are about 65 trillion daily signals that come in. So can I take all of that and then can I develop a use case around that, right? So that is where the birth of a few of these assistive products, such as let's say Microsoft Security Copilot or Microsoft M365 Copilot, all this comes into play. Those are the ones that are attempting to deliver this promising use case, right? So if we look at a minorly ML supported a strong cybersecurity skilled resources, and then they having to go through this or a summary of these 65 trillion daily signals vis-a-vis having a security co-pilot or let's say a use case around that does all this summarization for me, and then me by defining a certain priority rules and then letting it know what are the most impactful ones, what should be addressed primarily, then I would be able to prioritize my day as a security analyst. I would be able to prioritize my day by enhancing or building on this Gen AI use case. Again, if I drill down further, so what is it leading to? So, okay, I spoke about a large LLM model. I spoke about using a GPT-4 or an OpenAI or a security contextualized model, and then I talk about infusing the summary that's coming from my threat intelligence feeds. So that is where I have to drill down the basic. First and foremost thing that comes to my mind is false positive reduction. So how can I reduce the number of false positives? Where that is where now human effort goes in. A lot of human effort goes in. So those are the easily automatable ones and easily fed as an input to my Gen AI, and that can bring this down and then give me a summary of them. Again, going from there, what is it eventually leading to? My next case, in a use case or the one with the strong benefit is reduction in the response time, right? So let's say I have a team of let's say 40 SOC analysts or security analysts sitting in my SOC, and then if they having to go through, not all 40 could be of equal competence or equal capability levels, which is we know about the shortage of skills that we have in this area. Now all of this going through a manual process of me trying to do it on my own. I didn't get something, let me reach out to a better expert or a security lead, and then go there and get it. Rather, if I use Gen AI to generate a step-by-step context or a procedural guidance by using a natural language like model, and then have an investigation sequence and then that bring it down. Yeah, if you look at it, that will definitely bring down the investigation time from hours or even days in an extreme extent to few minutes, right? So when you do have an identification being done, and then again as I always say, we have to handle these with caution. We should never ignore the man in the loop. The human intelligence should never be underrated. Again, they should come up as suggestion to the analyst, and then if you choose that one of these alerts is definitely a strong positive or a positive to be acted upon, that is where I can see Gen AIs or co-pilots, maybe, guidance in having a step-by-step procedure in how do I mitigate this, and then again apply human intelligence on how much of this, or the estate that you should be covering. There could be fewer areas that we could be overlooking, by lack of procedural guidance, right? All that can be brought down if I implement this use case around Gen AI. Again, when I said the ability to prioritize, a lot of times, let's say there is a high severity vulnerability, or there is an alert, and then how did we respond to that as SOC team, right? It is extremely crucial to document this knowledge. Document what did the team do, and then how did we mitigate, what are the timelines. So last time I mitigated in, let's say, 8 hours, or I applied the patch in 4 hours, so this time what is it going to be, or what are the series of steps that I took. So every time when this post facto analysis happens, it's a huge manual activity, right? Similarly, if there is an automation playbook being created, who's going to do the documentation part? I mean, who know our programmers, we know our security analysts. We are always on the go for finding out the next problem to fix, or finding out the next challenge to solve. But who will do this mandatory housekeeping work of, let's say, documentation, pruning the code to fit a standard, and so on and so forth? All these activities can definitely be given to GenAI. These are important tasks again, but these are not so critical that they would require a human effort always. Yes, human required effort would still be required when I'm talking about an approval, or one cursory glance to whatever is there. And then this, in addition to this also gives me an ability to prioritize my time, right? Rather than an analyst at the end of a major event, he having to spend 4 hours or 6 hours in documenting this stuff, collecting details from, let's say, Sentinel or Splunk, and then putting it down. There can be a code in place, or a product, a snippet in place that does all of its own. Then again, there is one important aspect wherein I'm urging my engineering team to take it up as their next security use case, which is separating weak signals from noise. Again, weak signals are not no signals; they are not noise. They are still signals. But then, if you look at the interesting aspect of UEBA, so there could be signals that are not way too strong that automatically come up on your radar, but then those are still there. Those could still be signals at an early stage. So we consider them as weak signals, and then we don't act on it until they mature. Again, lack of time, lack of skill, and all this stuff. Now, particularly when your ASR, when your attack surface area is huge, the number of weak signals getting mixed in with noise, with non signals, is very, very high. If you train a model, if you generate develop and fulfill a use case, you implement a use case for that. How do I define, what do I consider as early signals or weak signals? Maybe the effort that's spent in a stronger signal after it's been manifested as a threat, right? The amount of effort that the team spends in would definitely come. It's like shifting left, as we say in the otherwise in our programming world. How do I shift left? How do I catch these threats very early on in their life cycle? I think that is another interesting area where Gen AI can help me. All in all, in a way, in addition to this, the stronger benefit here, one of the ones that Harish had, cursorily passing reference that he has made, is about human productivity, right, and skill availability. All of us knew the shortage of skills that we have in cybersecurity area. Now, most of these, about more than 50% of these points, would directly lead into augmenting the skill set, or helping out the team in handling the skills that would require more finesse at a larger level. I can use these Gen AI use cases to support me in that part, right? And then this is a major this is something that excites me a lot more in my engineering team. That is what I definitely lack on. And then if I look at the people who I even if I have to deploy them as the regular security engineers in my SOC, then what can they do vis-a-vis what can they do with the assistance of, let's say, a security co-pilot or a GenAI use case? The difference is humongous. So that is what I'm betting on. So that is why I'm so excited about having this intersection of GenAI with security. I mean, that's what I'm coming from on that.
Yeah, thank you, Krishna. It's very interesting and thanks for sharing that excitement. Looks like uh, you know, for all of us, at least on this panel, as well as the broader audience who would be interested in this topic, would come from a security background and looking at how Gen AI helps, while it helps the whole world in many different ways, how Gen AI helps in our own domain to make ourselves more productive and more effective. And a lot of things that you talked about was a lot on security operations, how Gen AI can enhance and make the different aspects of security operational use cases more effective, more maybe proactive, um, and then augment existing capabilities. I think one
If I
of the
were to
things that,
summarize in
yeah.
one word, Anurag, I would say
Mhm.
fortify. So that is where we have to look for Gen AI, right? I'm not referring to the other fortify, but uh, how do I fortify the existing security efforts using,
Right.
harnessing the potential of
Yeah.
Gen AI? Yeah.
Right. Right. And also, not just for the security operations or the security team, but also in that context which you touched upon was shift left, right? So many of these things that we do today after the fact, in the true DevSecOps model, how Gen AI can really make that, in its purest form by moving many of these um, signals or the computing power that Gen AI has, and the kind of prescriptive um, guidance that it can provide, how that can be leveraged by the shift left concept. So I think that was interesting, and I'm looking for. I'm sure, that when we say people working in these use cases, there can again be two buckets. One is people who are using Gen AI within their organizations and creating those custom use cases, which maybe on the business side or on the IT side. And then there are these product companies. I think Harish talked about how the different startups have come into the play, and Gen AI being a category of itself. So a lot of these product vendors and OEMs now trying to harness Gen AI and adding it as a top up on their existing products and
True.
services.
True.
That will also be something very interesting to look forward as we track this in the coming years. Thank you. So again, I think taking that spirit from what just was mentioned, I would move to Rajdeep. I think, Rajdeep, as you come from the risk and compliance background, um, and you've heard so much of excitement from Krishna Vini and some of the technology setup from Harish, and I'm sure you're hearing about this every day all around you, from the business, from IT, from customers, stakeholders. Let's get Gen AI out. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's show some, value. What keeps you? What worries you? Like, what would be something that keeps you awake when the businesses across are trying to push for adoption of Gen AI so much, and especially when they try to do it at great speed. So we don't have enough time, years at our hand to look at things and cautiously take those steps. How do you approach this situation? Looking around you.
Thanks, Anurag. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the learnings from my esteemed colleagues here. Um, so, you know, I tend to keep my devices and my worries off my bed, so I sleep pretty well. But and that confidence, has built up over the last few years or such. Most responsible organizations today have well integrated business, technology, and security compliance processes, as well as communication channels. So as we heard from Krishnavari and Harish, right, everybody is questioning everything. We've been taught to think about security and compliance while we design our processes and while we kind of use technology to facilitate business processes. So security is no longer a blocker, but more as an enabler, and in some cases even an accelerator or a differentiator. So that's what kind of gives me the peace and comfort, right? Businesses come upfront to us to ensure that they do not have to re-engineer the processes later on to meet evolving compliance or the threat landscape considerations later on, right? So there is this general understanding that sustainable and responsible technology adoption fosters innovation while respecting security and compliance, data protection, and privacy principles. So that's the solace in this. But to your point, the second half of your question, that um, the rapid adoption or the hasty adoption of any technology, be it Gen AI or otherwise, right, would bring about issues or considerations that ought to be discussed today rather than tomorrow after something goes wrong, right? I'll basically classify these considerations into three big buckets. One, there are considerations inherently with the technology, right? Any technology, in this case, Gen AI. Second, there are considerations internal to an organization, and then some related to the ecosystem. So external considerations. So we'll discuss, your question in perspective of these three considerations. Um, Coming first to inherently with the technology. Obviously, we've just heard from our esteemed panelists that it has a number of applications in cybersecurity, in business, in every sector, marketing and such, right? Um, so it's definitely there to make a difference, right? And it's not something that anyone can hide under a rock and escape from. You're going to have to adopt now or later, but it's good to be cognizant about and understand what it can do today and what it cannot do today. So Harish mentioned it can provide meaningful response most of the time, at least, right? So that's the caveat that might keep certain businesses which need like 100% accuracy 100% of the time away, at least in the short term, until the next versions kind of improve upon this. And and we are seeing how rapidly that is happening, like as Harish mentioned, the version that was released late last year is already obsolete, right? So there's not a whole lot of time for that to happen, but there is still some time until legal, healthcare, or such applications which need this 100% accuracy still would embrace this wholeheartedly. So there's this bucket of trust and confidence that the tool needs to still work upon or build. We've had cases and we've heard cases about lawyers kind of using chat gpt more generously and citing citations from there in their court proceedings and then being fined about it, right? So at least in India, two lawyers have been fined for using citations which they pulled from chat gpt. So that's a concern from a trust and confidence perspective, right? As we train these models more with more context, with more data, these concerns would basically iron out, right? But until then, misinformation, disinformation campaigns using chat gpt or the reliance on this information for business critical work would continue to be done with caveats, right? That's where we would need that human oversight to continue to ensure that whatever we are using in our processes is foolproof, right? Through each of the methods of or the training of these engines or the storage of this information, there are various considerations that come in inherently with the technology. What is the data that we are using, right? Is it sensitive data that we are feeding to a tool that will be exposed to others, right? Would that lead to any issues, and from a basic CIA perspective, confidentiality, integrity, and availability perspective, will I be still able to identify plagiarism for my universities or such, right? Those are all valid and just considerations. Will there be copyright infringements? Will there be legal exposure for something that I used blindly from chat gpt? So one is inherently with the technology there are things to improve, and second, there needs to be a layer of human supervision that is required still from that perspective. As long as these two are there, I can I security and business representatives don't really need to sweat it out, right? The second bucket that we kind of look at is internally within an organization. So as Harish mentioned, especially in the recent times, there has been rapid democratization of Gen AI technology. Um, so what really is a cause of worry from an internal perspective is lack of visibility. We discussed just now, and you rightly mentioned, Anurag, that there are use cases which are being built and which are being rolled out on a daily basis. There are OEMs and there are vendors who are coming up with these things. There are also individuals who are using chat gpt and such bard and other things at their personal as well as professional level. One key area of concern is, are they really aware of the security and compliance considerations that come with it, right? Are they aware of the current limitations of this technology, and do they know about the safe usage of these applications, AI ML applications, into their daily business responsibilities, right? Are they feeding sensitive data sensitive data to it, if I'm getting my code checked or code generated, or if I'm feeding my code in to check for errors or such, am I risking the API keys that come with it, right? Am I risking sensitive client information or private, internal confidential information? Am I even kind of exposing my firm's intellectual property? So these are all my internal business considerations, and a lot of it has to do with lack of awareness, right? So I think there is a need for the organizations to ensure that there is you know an update on their acceptable use policies. There's an update on their training modules to sensitize their user base on what is sustainable and responsible adoption of this technology, what are the pitfalls that we need to be really aware of, and we need to kind of navigate through this. The third bucket is basically the external factors. Now, when you talk about external factors, there are various ecosystem entities, right? And there are adversaries who've been using Gen AI for attacks that are, based on, like, we've heard in the media about deep fakes. We have heard about, voice calls going on, and people fooling mothers based using the voice, manipulated voice of their children. So all of this is now a reality. So we have to kind of coach our ecosystem about how to deal with this. Earlier, when we used to take phishing awareness trainings, we used to say that one of the pointers to identify a phishing email is look for grammatical errors or punctuation marks or such, right? Now adversaries are using chat gpt to generate lures which are 100% accurate, right, in terms of language, punctuation, and such. So some of the common threads or understandings need to be kind of revisited, right? What do our trainings kind of tell the user now, right? It should not be that they see a well worded email and everything, they feel that, oh, this is not a phishing email because it looks so rightly done, right? It's now being done using an artificial intelligence tool. um, on the same hand, like in the same voice, right, we heard from Krishna very rightly that it could assist the blue team as well. It could assist the security operations, incident management, rule generation, analysis, crunching that large information, 65 trillion daily signals, right, to identify the ever evolving malicious patterns. So there is good news. There is a silver lining at the end of the tunnel as well. um, the second ecosystem partner that really we need to consider here is the regulatory and compliance framework. Yes, we've had a whole lot of buzz about one law in the European jurisdiction, which kind of talks about sustainable adoption, and develops some kind of a framework for us to reference. But as we know, especially the jurisdictions that the audience belongs to, India, Sri Lanka, we're not very early adopters, or we are not like ahead of the curve when it comes to establishing guidelines and establishing a regulatory or compliance framework around technology or its usage, right? So we have to be aware of it. We have to look outwards. We have to look for where these guidelines exist, and reach out to them. A third external factor is, for most of the technology world, and since the rapid digitization in the COVID and the post-COVID era as well, there have been risk models that have helped us move forward, like there's zero trust and such. That's really helping organization. Even for AI, the availability of risk models is there, but it would mature over a period of time, right? So the industry consensus of how to handle these challenges, of how to handle these risks, will be baked into formalized methods of risk assessment and such, specifically aimed at AI ML systems, AI ML use cases, right? So that's the third external factor that we need to consider. Having said that, like obviously there's no fear mongering here, and there's no deal breaker here. All these factors with the technology, inherently with the technology, will improve over time. Internally within the organization, we saw all stakeholders being very cognizant and aware about these pitfalls, and we are working jointly towards remediating these. And externally as well, like we have, if we have one side of the coin where adversaries are using it, we also have another side of the coin where the blue team is actively using it. Regulations are being drafted on a day-to-day basis as well. So just to summarize, I would say that once my kid is of reasonable age, I don't stop him from using a scissor. I just ensure that he gets a safer tool, and I inculcate safe usage and best practices. So awareness is going to be the key here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rajdeep. I think it was well articulated in terms of what and how you can approach this situation. And in my view, based on what you've said, also, I mean, if you'd agree, I think it's more like no matter what technology, I think it was blockchain a couple of years back, everybody was talking about, and then now it's Gen AI. I mean, every time we talk about any such new technology at the block, the fundamentals don't change. I mean, if you still look at the fundamentals of risk management, the fundamentals of people, process, technology, controls, the spectrum in which you look at, and then the fundamentals of looking at controls from what are the physical, technical, process, administrative controls, all those things that we read and studied as we started our careers in security can still apply to any beast or boon out there, to really dissect it and kind of get to a level of comfort, to say, okay, we've done the basic hygiene check, and then the rest of it is something that we learn and improve. So it's, I mean, what you said, I mean, training is another thing. I think at the end of the day, human are the weakest link. No matter how much and what you all do in the organization, I think training, as for traditional environment, remains the same, as important issue here as well, because that is something is even more important, from the scenarios that you talked about, more advanced phishing attacks and things like that, deep fakes, etc. So great, thanks Rajdeep, for that overview and your perspective on it. I would go back to Harish, to have a question which is now a logical extension to everything that we have heard. We've heard a technologist, from a security standpoint, excited about doing new things and trying to use it. We've heard about the concerns from the risk and compliance standpoint. And then I want to ask you, Harish, because you must have been in those situations as well, where there are business stakeholders trying to get value out of Gen AI. It could be IT team as well, or technology teams, and you as the security architect, trying to be the bridge between the business use cases that they're trying to achieve and the security risks and the security threats that we are trying to mitigate. So when you're in that situation, how do you typically face that? What have you seen, while trying to deal with it? What do you think would be some of the myths that you would want to share with us, that you would like to bust as well? Maybe if you could share some thoughts on that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Anurag. From my experience, I learned, and in fact, I'll summarize the conclusion first, right? I learned that this technology is not as harmful to enterprise data confidentiality or privacy as it was initially made out to be. And I also think enterprises are slowly realizing this. And I'm talking primarily from a security and compliance perspective of Gen AI, and not general AI related risks, such as hallucinations and bias. They've always been there. Specifically with generative AI, I think organizations are now realizing that obviously with the hype, there was also a lot of backlash on the technology because of certain incidents. So when ChatGPT first launched, just like with most emerging technologies, most enterprises were not entirely sure about the use cases and the security or compliance implications of its usage in the enterprise. And on top of that, there were new incidents being reported every couple of weeks, right? The data and intellectual property issues, property leakage issues we've read about at Amazon and Samsung and a few other companies. Also, I think OpenAI was not a known name, at least not outside the tech and AI circles, not until then. And lastly, there was no enterprise grade or enterprise ready offering available for Gen AI at the time. So initially, there was a lot of pushback. Today, I think we have enterprise grade solutions available, such as with Azure OpenAI, AWS Bedrock, and even OpenAI's enterprise offerings, right, which allows companies to securely use large language models within their enterprise boundaries for dedicated usage by their employees, and in turn keep their business data within their control or even monitoring scope. So in this context, one myth that I would like to bust is that these LLMs do not learn from our data on the fly. So when you submit a prompt, the input that user provides to these models, and receive a response from the model, such as say ChatGPT, it is not immediately learning from your data right there. In fact, training an LLM is an involved and computationally intensive process. So it involves chunking, tokenization, and training, which takes months, if not weeks. And I'm not even talking about the computational hardware that is required with GPUs and arrays of GPUs and so on. So if you put data into a model, it does not immediately learn from that data and start providing that same data in its responses to other users. But yes, one important distinction here is that the model provider can capture your data separately outside the model, prepare it, and then train the model with your data. But this is the model provider or the service provider using, or if you will, misusing your data. So this risk is there with any SaaS provider today, which you can mitigate or manage through your third-party risk management strategies. The other important point that I would like to highlight, and this is not really a myth, but something that enterprises should keep in mind when deploying LLM integrated apps, especially, is about the new and emerging risks associated with these models, with the usage of these models. There have been new attack vectors such as prompt injections and jailbreaking, wherein people have been able to get these Gen AI based chat assistants to respond with content that is considered offensive or unsuitable for users. But at this point, vectors like prompt injections, they're mostly being used for fun. There could be more serious brand reputation implications for enterprises if these models are used to return some unsavory content via an official business app. But otherwise, so far, we've just seen people exploiting this for fun. There are other new vectors as well with
Naresh, are you on mute? I think you went on mute. Did you?
No, I haven't.
No, I can hear you now. Maybe it's
Can
something
you?
at my
Okay.
end. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So, like I
Maybe
said,
just last few seconds, if you could repeat that, that would be great.
I was just talking about the brand reputation. That the brand reputation hit that enterprises might take if something like prompt injection was exploited on an official business app that's exposed to the internet. In fact, there are also other vectors, not just prompt injection, right? OWASP has already put out the OWASP top 10 for LLM applications, highlighting the top 10 security issues associated with LLMs in the wild today. So this covers risks like, apart from prompt injection, training data poisoning, insecure output handling, and then sensitive information disclosure, and so on. Similarly, there's also MITRE that has Atlas, which is more generic adversarial threat landscape for AI systems. This covers various tactics and techniques that attackers can leverage to target AI integrated systems, not specific to Gen AI. So MITRE Atlas is also the tactics listed are off the top of my head, things like ML model inference API access, full model access, model evasion, and so on. So I can draw a parallel between Gen AI solutions and open source. So there are risks associated with both. Some of them are new and emerging, but we cannot completely block their usage in an enterprise. Temporarily, yes, until we figure out our strategy, until we determine how we want to securely enable this. But in the long term, maybe not, right? Yes, there are a few industries where it may remain permanently blocked, or they will deploy their own internal versions. But as long as we are able to, understand the risks, be aware of it, risks associated with this new technology, and we are able to design controls around these risks and threats. That could be things like, internal deployment, validation, continuous monitoring, retraining. I think the security and compliance community should be okay to allow businesses to explore, deploy, and use this technology within the enterprise.
Got it. Thanks, Harish. Thanks. I think it's assuring to say what you summarize, that it's not as bad as it sounds or as it's perceived. Maybe again, it comes along with the hype that is there around people making different points of view and people just subscribing to whatever suits them. And it's great to know people on the ground how things really are. So thanks for clarifying those myths and busting those, as well as having a positive view towards Gen AI and how it can change things for better, more than for the worse. So I think I would you know, just again extend this a little further on, we heard about Harish talking about how he is dissecting Gen AI from a security standpoint as more and more of it's getting adopted. Maybe a question to you, Krishna, Veni, would be, um, as I think this year, or let's say if you put a timeline in my view, and I have not done full research on it, I would just say that 2022 was the point where it was just announced to the world. 2023 has been the time people are just kind of
Stormed.
figuring out
Yeah.
what to do with it. 2024 and beyond will be the time when you will see people actually doing something real, and
Yeah.
things coming into fruition. So as more companies start adopting it around you, which is the year of 2024,
Mm.
what would be, you know from your standpoint, how do you think businesses and technology should approach adoption of Gen AI in their organizations that needs both the security and compliance as well as time to market objectives? uh, what should
Yeah.
be an approach when they take this journey?
Sure. That's a very, I would say, tricky question here. You are talking about time to market objectives as well as using Gen AI and leveraging the benefits of it. I would want to look at it this way. See, um, any technology that's going huge, as you rightly said, the industrial revolution, and then invention of steam engine, and maybe invention of wheel before that. So all these had their own time to mature. But whereas that, if you look at this Gen AI and then adoption or explosion of Gen AI, if I were to use the word, it didn't have as much time for us to all understand, sink in, see the repercussions. The couple of cases that Rasdeep had mentioned about the lawyers being fined, and that's just about India, where we are not technology adoption leaders. We are always followers there, right? But still we found few cases. And then we also know about the class action suits that are happening against GitHub as well as a few other companies, right? So there are extreme cases. Now we are reading it. When we read about those in news, we are on the other side of the board. Now your question asks me, if I am on this side of the table, if I'm inside the organization, right, or inside uh, a group that's responsible for the repercussions that would come in, right? So I would also want to include the geographical importance, right? The kind of, so when we talked about data privacy, what did Europe do? So it was not a knee-jerk reaction, but then they came with GDPR, and then they just said, we're shutting our parameters in a way, so none of our data. You look at countries like Germany, they're extremely strict, and then when you go to the rest of mainland Europe, and then how it spreads when you go to US and the rest of the world. So similarly, some regulations, or I would say some guidance, is starting to come from governments, right? As fresh as last Friday, last week, yeah, Rishi Sunak was announcing about an AI safety institute. He is talking about the leaps and bounds that this technology is going on, and how his government as well as the leading governments are looking at trying to balance out what is safe and what is not, right? And then just few hours back, less than a day back, there is also an announcement. There is the first World AI Safety Summit that had happened, and then the governments, including that of the US and the UK, and a few more, France and Korea and South Korea and so on. They did sit together, and then they agreed to formulate a guideline. I would say they would want to see how. I mean, yeah, they had representation not just from government but also from academia and civil society. So the primary aim is to test the safety of AI models before they are released, right? So they are going to set up AI safety institutes, and then that's covering the public domain, or public sector capability, right? They would want to test the most advanced frontier models. Now, when I step a little backwards from the geography, from the nation, or the world bodies, if I step down to an organization level, if I were a CISO, and I would also be having my own targets on how I should be, as I think Rasdeep was mentioning, right? Security is an enabler. We should always be looking at it as an enabler in achieving business objectives, right? So how do I continue to look at Gen AI as another enabler and not an impediment? So that is where, again, touching on other point that Rasdeep had mentioned, the human factor, right? and he touched on a beautiful thing, which is awareness. Right, awareness is the key. How do I train people? How do I let people know that this is something to do or this is something not to do, or how do I let them know how these open models or how these closed models work, right? I mean, I'll just replay my understanding. So a closed model is where we use, the openly available stuff like Chat GPT is where you don't know what's there in it. That's a closed model. So you don't. It's a black box. You just use their APIs or you just use their web versions and then you feed in your inputs and then you get the output. You have no clue on what's the algorithm that's running behind and how it's being trained. That's a closed model. But if you look at an open model, it's something that you deploy within your premises, either on premise or in a, I would say, private cloud maybe, right? So how that is where you deploy your own algorithms, or you take a version of a commercially available model and then deploy it or install it and start using it only with your data. Now, where the reason why I brought in these two is, as a CISO or as a CTO, I should be willing to work on the models that train or that balance these both. So it's always an architects or technocrats, always his vision or his responsibility is to balance out between few important things like performance or safety, time to market, right? So that is where I say adding a human element to that and then putting your top down approach. What comes to my mind is develop a trustworthy AI framework, right? That should be covering responsible AI guidelines, and that should be covering your organizational vision, your concerns, the kind of industry you are in, right? So all of this should come into play, and then that is where your AI framework should be coming from. And then you take an integrated approach for risk and governance, right? So for, I mean, all of us are more or less from the cybersecurity domain, and then risk, compliance, and governance, we can never run away from that. That's always in the back of our minds whenever we do, or whenever we perform any kind of an audit. Now, how do I integrate this AI guidelines into my risk and governance framework? That's another aspect. Now, it could be, it should, in fact, it should include guidance for classification and I would say prioritization of use cases. When I say classification, as in is this okay to be exposed to open internet? Is it not okay? Again, if I look at prioritization, what impact is it going to have on my business in the long run or in the short term? Again, if one use case has to go into production, if I want to run it on my production data. So, what is the workflow? What are the approvals? Who all stakeholders need to be understanding? Man in the loop, basically. Who are the men in the loop, or who are the people in the loop? So that's again the other part of the framework that I'm talking about. And then again, as I speak about, every one of these people have to be aware of the implications and the responsibility that they carry in making it a safe framework for everyone. The other important aspect here is, see, no one model is perfect, though it appears to be so, right? We have seen across different technology aspects. So you should be able to. The mindset should be that you should go ahead with poly models, not with the uni model. You cannot take one, let's say, closed model like ChatGPT and then try and apply all your use cases on top of that. Right? Whereas at the same time, because why do I go with that? A closed model, your computation and all that infrastructure, you need not have to invest so much, and then the availability of staff to create, maintain, and configure your local models, that risk is not there when you're going with these closed models. But then the large risk you run is when you are trying to get data from ChatGPT or something like that. The data that you give in is going out of your premise, right? It may or may not be used to train the model as such. It could be pre-trained one, right? As per the definition. But then your data is leaving your premise. It's hosted on cloud. It's hosted on SaaS, right? So that's a concern that you always should run in your mind. So while a lot of these vendors, Gen AI product vendors, categorically deny that nothing of that sort is happening, we know a lot of these examples that happened before. So what we thought versus what had actually happened, and then eventually leading to legal procedures that go on and on and on. We saw Facebook apologizing. We saw uh, Apple Cloud being leaked, so on and so on. So once the data is out of your premise, there is no guarantee as to, there is no, at least forever guarantee that it stays so, right? So you have to carefully weigh between what model to use for what. Okay, So one of the safer approaches would be to go ahead and use a closed model that's openly available on internet for the data that is okay to be exposed, right? And then use your open models where you have your own algorithm, and then you deploy it on top of an LLM within your network or within your boundaries for uh, IP or for with data that is critical to your business. Do that on an open model, right? So how do you strike that balance? How do you decide which goes where? Is what should be defined in your AI framework, your responsible AI framework, or trustworthy AI framework, whatever name you want to give it. Okay? So that becomes a crucial step. In fact, that is a journey which would allow you to define how do I trade off, how do I handle this trade off. Again, if I have to take a couple of examples, maybe we know all these hedge funds, right, or these investment advisors, right? So where they go ahead and what do they do? So they analyze the performance of multiple companies over years, right? It could be decades, or it could be much more than that. So you analyze their performance and then choose if that fund should be included in my portfolio or not. And that's what these investment advisors do. Now, what do they act on? They act on publicly available information, correct? They act on the annual reports. They act on uh, I would say, whatever is the quarterly reports, annual reports, how is it performing over year on year, and all such stuff, which is data available on the internet. So go ahead, use your closed models for that. You don't need to know how this data goes in and where this data gets stored. All that you need is a particular insight, and you can always develop a use case around that that uses takes information from these multiple companies' website over multiple years, and then eventually you come up and then uh, develop a model on a closed model, sorry, develop your use case on a closed model. Whereas if I take an example of giving a personalized travel advisory, there what is a personalized travel advisory? Let's say Krishna wants to travel, and she just one moment please. Sorry, gentlemen, that was Murphy walking into my room.
Yeah,
Sorry for that. Yeah.
no problem.
Now, if I take a personalized travel advisory, so how does it go? So Krishna wants to travel to some place with her family. Maybe she's looking for a beach vacation, maybe with a bit of heritage or forts and all that thrown in. Now, this is all the information that I don't mind sharing to a travel website, correct? So Krishna feeds in all this information. So let me just take all that information. Let my closed model do that analysis and then finally give a set of recommendations. I'm fine with that. I'm okay because however I'm traveling and this information is not too confidential, right? But if you look at it from the travel company point of view, this information, let's say I'm talking about any particular travel package vendor, this information can definitely be sent to a closed model that's available over internet with no harm because the customer herself is willing to share it over internet. Now, then comes the next step. How do I calculate the package, right? So that is where I'll have to tell that I have to talk about. I could be having my own business sensitive pricing list that I have with different hotels, right? So let us say I pick up some hotel in Goa, or it could be some place like what should I say, some place in Wales. So how do I combine this combination that comes from the from closed model, and then combine it with the pricing sheet that I have with each of these hotels, that is business sensitive information. This information should not be out in the internet, right? I could be having some preferred rate with, let's say, Marriott. I could be having some preferred rate with Hyatt, Park Hyatt, and this information is sensitive to how I run my business because that impacts the pricing that I provide to Krishnamay. Correct. So that is where this use case, at least I think, is beautifully shows us how a company should combine these two models. Go with the poly model, combine a closed model that's available on internet with your specific model that's there now within your premises, and still give uh, an almost real-time advice to the customer. That's beating the time constraints, that beating the turnaround, and then also the pricing consideration at the same time, not risking the data privacy and not leaking the sensitive details that I do have. So we should definitely be looking at going ahead with all this. Now, why am I? Can this not be taken by a business leader? Why should there be a framework around? Here again comes the point of awareness, the point of having the risk of, awareness of risk exposure. All this comes into play. No, rather than expecting each of us or each of the business executives to be aware of this, it should be better to have a guideline or a framework in place, so that my time to market targets are met, keeping in mind the cost effectiveness that comes by increasing staff productivity by using these Gen AI models, and not compromising on the delta privacy parts of it. And a long answer to a straightforward question, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will have a few comments on this. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Krishnavini. I think thanks for simplifying the approach. I would say, I think in the let's say, I mean, how it sounds to me is we start whatever you call it, the framework, with the integrated AI framework or whatever the word counts. But basically, there is um, um, a grounding board where it is a combination of, again, people, process, technology aspects with AI at the center, which includes aspects of risk and compliance as well. So how do we, once we have, maybe that's the question which I'm going to come next to Rajdeep to, but once we've figured out how we build that framework and how do we stand that up, which will then drive the things about the next steps of the journey, which is, okay, based on the framework will tell you, okay, if you're using a certain category of information or classification of information based on your business importance, you then define the deployment models or the models that you talked about, uni model or poly models, and then the remaining is, I would say, the rest of the system life cycle kicks in. But having that framework, which gives you that 360-degree view of what and where to go for certain use cases, is very, very critical element of this journey. Is what is the key takeaway. And and for that, I think I would just want maybe Rajdeep, because in from your sense, when we or any company for that matter is trying to build this framework, where do we start from? I mean, there are many frameworks for general information security out there. I know we talked in this discussion couple of, I mean, a lot of rapid um, uh, release of different guidelines and regulations as we speak. But from your research and your experience so far, Rajdeep, what do you would suggest for the listeners? Where should they start building this framework? What resources we have available? Where do we start from?
Perfect. Thank you, Anurag. So there are frameworks available, as we've discussed. Like, there are standards that are out there, and they've been there for a while now. Like, ISO has a standard out there about responsible AI processes, development process, and such. Risk assessment, for risk assessment 23894, that's available. Um, these, as in any other case, these provide high level guidelines that need to be tailored to the business specifics, that need to be aligned to your organizational context, right? So that kind of tailoring would always be required. But to your other part, what are the resources available? They are immense. If I was to list them, and again, this is a very clear example where we can take help of technology, to understand what is available with me today, right? From a standard framework organization perspective, what can I use in this? But I'll just talk about a few of my favorites. That obviously there is the government organizations, right? And there is the whole consultation process of formulation of the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. There is NEST, as always, to our rescue. They have a trustworthy and responsible AI resource center, AIRC, which we can refer to. There are, as Harish mentioned, non-profit organizations like OWASP, right, MITRE, ISC Square, and peer organizations that come out with these guidelines, these notifications that can help organizations to channel their energy and their processes in the right way. And the third critical from this perspective would be the consultants and vendors who've pledged billions of dollars of investment in this area. They come out with regular blogs and posts and guidances on these. There are ample frameworks out there. There are ample do's and don'ts out there that we can refer to. So these three kind of tend to be my top go-to things. But there are other resources which kind of meet specific use case requirements, right? If it's more from a research standpoint or such, from a new development standpoint, then you have academic institutions and you have courses from these academic institutions that you can take yourself to. There is everyone from MIT to the IITs and IIMs have courses aligned to artificial intelligence, right? There are books that you can refer to, AI for healthcare, AI for cybersecurity, and such. There are usual go-to, especially for this audience, right? Technology news outlets, the CSO online and such, CISO.com. Those definitely are available. There are OpenAI and other institutes who are kind of democratizing the use of Gen AI. They have spent enough and have kind of made available enough resources to the common audience for this. But again, where I started from, businesses, security and compliance teams need to have this realization that the onus lies on them to educate their business stakeholders, right? To educate their ecosystem, to mitigate the lack of awareness, provide bite-sized role-based trainings, which have curated content tweaked to the organization or the institute's environment, threat landscape, regulatory compulsions, and such. We all need to work towards updating our acceptable use policies, right, based on the use of these resources, to ensure that business doesn't have to go to 10 places to understand what they can, what they cannot do, or what's permissible or what's not, right? They have everything at one place as to how they can kind of safely adopt this technology without hindering any sort of innovation, or kind of causing any roadblock or blockages. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rajdeep. So looks like there's a lot out there already, which you mentioned, and
I
it will
just
be,
have one
yeah.
note on this, Anurag. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a wonderful list that you had compiled, Rasdeep. I mean, I have been referring a few of these already. You mentioned one good quote. Responsibility lies with you. That's what organizations need to recognize. In that concept, I was going through. We started our learning, and during that, there is a beautiful shade model that Microsoft had published. Just like the way we have for cloud technologies, there is also a shade responsibility model that Microsoft has published for AI models as well. So whether we use the SaaS one or the regular one, so we have to understand that even for the closed models such as ChatGPT or whatever, the only responsibility that the vendor owns is the computational power, right? So that entire line is what is owned by the vendor. So if you look at any other rows, it's all either shared or completely owned by the customer, as in us, right, as organizations. So that's one beautiful point I thought I should
Yeah.
augment your super list as well.
Thanks for adding to that. That's actually a wonderful resource. Thank you.
Yeah. I think some of the concepts from the later or the recent technologies like cloud and blockchain and all will also help us learn how to deal with it. Like the shared responsibility makes a lot of sense because there is a consumer side and there's a provider side, and provider can only do so much and the consumer has to do so much, because things like bias or things like those kind of risks can only be done by a shared model responsibility, I think. So that's a good insight. Thank you. And I was just about to say, with so much out there already to learn and refer, I think it will be also interesting to know if there is a rationalized view of everything out there. Because like privacy used to be such a big word at one point, and it continues to evolve. At the end of the day, it comes down to certain basic tenets, right? Choice, consent, and breach notification. Similarly, here, I'm assuming in AI, after all this that is going on and being published, it will just boil down to some basic tenets. of AI, shared responsibility, for example, being one of those important insights that you just shared, and using that to come up with that framework that initially Krishna, when he spoke about, which will not just let you adopt and adopt and release new use cases into your organization, but also to directly evaluate what should be our priority, and where should we invest more money and time. So with that, I think it was a great discussion so far. We've come to the end of the time for this discussion, and I think I've been overwhelmed with so much of information that has been shared by the panelists here. I hope all the panelists enjoyed hearing everybody's views from their respective experiences and insights and perspectives. I'm taking away from this discussion that few key things. One is definitely an understanding of why Gen AI is so popular. Then, while it's not really a really new technology that just came into being last year, it has been there for a while. The main thing is how things will evolve in the next few years, which will really clear the dust around it. It's good to know that the panelists here are positive about Gen AI, so there is no negative sentiment about Gen AI. It's all positive. It's a good enabler, a good technology. I see fingers crossed. So it's good technology to consider and leverage for a better world and a better mankind. And I think some of the other things we talked about, which while there's so much we can do from controls, risk, and compliance standpoint, the human factor remains the key element here as well, which is nothing new in security in general. So it remains even more important than before, because now it's on the human to really figure out what is real and what is a deep fake. And yes, it's a lot out there already. So although it's a new technology, a lot has been written, a lot has been spoken, including this particular discussion as well. So it will be interesting to know how all of this information is leveraged into usable information by creating the integrated frameworks that are working for the organizations and then used for adopting AI within those respective organizations. Thank you so much to all the panelists here for your time and feedback and inputs. And I hope everybody listening enjoys it as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I wish you all a very great day.
Thank you, Anurag. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you very much.
Thank you.